In his upcoming autobiography, Pope Francis has disclosed that suicide bombers threatened him during his trip to Iraq, but was spared by a British intelligence tip. You used the adjective conservative, which means one who holds to anything and refuses to look past it, which is a suicidal mindset. Pope Francis's last living sister, Maria Eleanina, has broken her heart. Silence with a string of shocking disclosures following over 10 years of avoiding the limelight. In a recent interview, she revealed before their recollections of their early years in Buenos Aires' rich family tales and the majority of particularly a confidential communication that can provide insight into a hitherto unidentified and Maria Eleanina disclosed a startling revelation regarding the Catholic Church. Her Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis' brother, decided to keep quiet about a number of delicate issues within the Church out of concern that complete revelation may result in disastrous. She claimed that he decided to keep quiet because if he told everyone, her remarks have caused shockwaves, and Church will never be the same. The Catholic Church and beyond, sparking a heated discussion over the function of. Let's examine Maria Eleanina's testimony in order to understand truth, and honesty in faith. From Jorge's agony in his last days to the regrets she was afraid to express. Maria Elena, a sister's heart, speaks out loud following the Pope's death on April 21, 2025, Easter Monday, the Vatican formally declared. At the Casa Santa Marta, Pope Francis had died, although his passing had been anticipated following months of sickness. The world was nevertheless taken aback not only by the death of a cherished leader, but also by the unexpected surge of buried, unspoken feelings and recollections are suddenly emerging thousands of kilometers away from Rome. A reserved woman who was mostly ignored by the world press, undoubtedly felt special. Maria Elena Bergoglio is the woman who is experiencing private grief. For more than 10 years, Pope's lone surviving sister lived in isolation in Argentina, never took advantage of her by avoiding cameras and inquisitive inquiries. Fame of a powerful brother, but with Pope Francis's death at the age of 88 or so, changed inside her a silent urgency, a silent grief, and finally she spoke. It was not from the Vatican press podium that Maria Elena made her first public statement. Additionally, it was unvarnished, hauntingly poignant, and not written by a church media team. Sincere, she gulped back tears on national television as she told me he was not only the Pope, he was also Jorge, the youngster who used to chase dogs in the backyard and make. She made me laugh while I was ill and comforted me while we sobbed the night our father passed away. Paused, carefully selecting her next words, but after saying them, she departed the studio. I never wanted him to be Pope, and that choice set us back more than a simple sentence that no one will ever understand, but it rung like a midnight bell to everyone. Started to question, what did she mean, what was the price, and why now? Global media and loyal followers started to follow Maria Eleanina after her speech. They dug further and followed up on past hints, asking new questions about what else Maria might have concealed. All these years, and why did she decide to speak up only after her brother passed away? However, this was just the start. What she revealed next would shock everyone. A fresh door was opened by her words, allowing the public to enter a world that few had witnessed. Jorge Mario Bergoglio's private life before Maria Eleanina was born. 12 years younger than Jorge in 1948, they grew up together in a typical Italian immigrant family in Buenos Aires. Their mother was a devoted housewife at Maria's household, and their father worked on railroads. Jorge had steady gaze, shunned crowds, shunned attention, and frequently ventured alone into underprivileged areas to assist individuals in need, as numerous reports attest to. That the siblings had a tight upbringing, but their distance grew when Jorge became a Jesuit and advanced through the ranks fast. When Jorge became Pope and kilometers were no longer used to measure their separation. Close family members were discouraged from public life by the Vatican's stringent regulations. Maria Elena was suffering illness and leading a peaceful life at the time. She lived in a nun-run convent on the outskirts and had long avoided public life. When Pope Francis passed away, Maria's life was a dim shadow on the periphery of a worldwide symbol. Elenina was unable to visit Rome. Thus she had no opportunity to bid farewell or make a final touch, didn't attend the burial, and didn't even mention her name in the formal goodbyes. But the stillness that reverberated the loudest was reminding us that despite the sainthood, there was still a brother, a son, and Jorge, a flesh and blood man, was the oldest of 5 siblings born in 1936 to an Italian immigrant family, where he worked and studied as a teenager. Employment as a nightclub and then in a chemical lab to support the family. Maria, the bouncer, remembered, "He was always silent but passionately. Even as a young child, he was protective and carried the weight of the world before the Vatican. Jorge's initial spark was ignited by someone else before he knew God. Their grandma, Rosa, was a strict religious woman with a strict code of ethics and a Maria claims Rosa ignited the fire of her fiery heart for justice. First fire in the fire of repentance, compassion, and inquiry that had no simple solutions here, then described a traumatic. Jorge carried a profound wound from childhood trauma with him to Rome. She claimed there was a betrayal in our family, not of faith, but of. He found that blood Jorge, who was about 12 years old, was the one who was most severely injured. For years, their father's second family, Maria, was kept a close secret, refused to provide names or specifics, but demanded that Jorge's childhood cease immediately. After losing his innocence, Jorge started living as though he was attempting to. Maria Jorge claims that the pivotal moment was when she decided to atone for the crimes of others. Chose to turn to God in order to get away rather than because he felt called. She claimed that my brother ran away from shame and didn't pursue a career as a priest because he felt it was his destiny. Even the most pious Catholics were left speechless by the statement's coldness. He was ordained as a Jesuit priest in 1969, but his age-related path was unique. 4 years after being ordained, he was appointed provincial superior of the. Despite Argentina's political turmoil, Jesuits have a significant influence in. After being named Benassari's auxiliary bishop in 1992, he swiftly became. This time, people were more interested in his lifestyle than his titles as archbishop. Jorge frequently visited the ill, stayed away from fancy cars, and cooked for himself. Impoverished and interacted with AIDS patients, then among the most. Ignored during the 2013 Cardinals meeting to choose Benedict's successor. Few people thought H would be selected at age 76 because he wasn't a strong candidate, but with the church engulfed in scandals, worn down and disintegrating. When they wanted something distinctive, they turned to Jorge Mario Bergoglio. The world was silent as he entered St. Peter's Basilica's balcony. "I just hoped they wouldn't choose him later," recalls Maria Elena. Acknowledged because the wait was too much, not because he didn't deserve it. It was an honest and agonizing reality, not one of rejection, but rather of a sister's concern that had observed that man's light and dark sides, which some people think. It was H's turbulent past that equipped him for the Pope he was familiar with. Maybe he didn't try to hide because of the failing scandal and the agonizing quiet. He confronted Maria Elena about the church's scars, which is why he will always remain. Her brother is not a perfect saint. Rather, he is a guy who has fallen and made the decision to. Maria Elena Bergoglio never left Benassari's. She always rose and moved forward with kindness. She is a gentle woman who lives quietly among sisters, caring for her garden and praying every day, having recollections of a sibling before he became a symbol, however, that no one else can comprehend. Those recollections are intended to return the Pope to his earthly surroundings rather than to cast doubt on his reputation. Still family, still flesh, still kin. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the priesthood he chose, commanded silence, sacrifice, and extreme isolation as why followed a rigorously religious path. Maria Elena stayed in the mundane world of. Even if their lives diverged, Benassari's never felt completely apart, at least not. Till H was appointed Pope Francis in 2013 from. When he asked her whether she felt pained not being by his side. Everything changed. During those momentous occasions, Maria Eleanina just provided a depressing. She added, "I've accepted that he belongs to the world and not to me anymore. However, I've always missed him." It wasn't jealousy, but rather a certain type of sadness. The grief experienced when your final family member turns into a symbol and you are abandoned. Yet when Pope Francis, who was previously commended for his kindness and humility, revealed the secrets of his. When Mara discovered life, the world had to reevaluate what might have happened. Maria Elena was once again astounded to learn that humility was not just a moral virtue but also a kind of penance. She muttered to the world, seemingly worried that the wind could hear the church. Nothing could be more horrifying than what has already been revealed. So stick with us because we'll examine what Maria refers to as the Vatican's hidden file in the following section. Something that she says Jorge concealed until his death, and according to the contents of what she revealed could alter the Church's history. Timeless tales of abuse, cover-ups, and corruption that rocked the. Following the death of Pope Francis, Maria Eleanina consented to sit down for. She obviously struggled with her voice in one last interview, but it didn't shake with emotion but with the burden of a reality that no one wanted to bear. She acknowledged that she had debated for years about whether or not to mention anything because it's not just about my brother. Regarding the Vatican's highest echelons of authority, Maria Jorge once held the opinion that there were realities the world was just not prepared to face. Because they were malevolent, but because they had the power to destroy all that the faithful held dear before he passed away, he discreetly assembled a number of records, including letters, audio recordings, and personal. Il document nascosto was the name of the document. According to Maria, the concealed file was never formally made public, not even his closest. How did Maria Elena learn about it when her counselors were aware of its entire contents? Disclosed that she had protected this secret like a lion for more than 10 years. Sacred vow to her beloved brother during a visit in 2012, when Jorge was still He met her in secret at their mother's house when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Gave her a letter in a sealed envelope along with a key. He didn't elaborate much. Remembered that he had just stated that I would know what to do if the church ever experienced a crisis. Maria Eleanina didn't know her brother would become pope at the time. She put the envelope in her bedroom's little wooden box, but it never opened. She only knew he was carrying a huge load in his eyes. Therefore she did it out of fear of hurting him. On the morning of Pope Francis's visit, she was overcome with a worry she had never witnessed before. Death, caught between sorrow and duty, Maria Elena made the decision to. When she initially opened the letter, the contents almost caused her to pass out. Jorge wrote a 3-page letter in black ink, his penmanship quivering as though written under tremendous pressure, in which Jorge acknowledged discovering a huge network of financial corruption within the Vatican that includes illicit transactions with. He detailed high-level misuse in authoritarian governments and international banks. Cover-ups in which influential cardinals utilized their resources and connections to shield. I want to tell the truth about what Jorge wrote, but I'm afraid the church will crumble, and billions of people's faith will be lost with sorrow, Maria added. Although no specific people or organizations were mentioned in the letter, Jorge left behind mysterious hints, bank account numbers, certain cardinals' initials, and he mentioned contracts that were executed in secret, saying that the key lead to a securely concealed beneath the Vatican, where the original records demonstrating everything was kept in storage. Jorge, I'm not sure if I'll have the guts to unlock that door. Acknowledged in the letter, but if I say nothing, it's out of protection. Maria Elena claimed that she sobbed for hours after the service, even though it hurts me. Upon reading it, she discovered that her brother had lived through a secret conflict between leaders. Despite the anxiety of the repercussions, she further disclosed that during his last. Before departing Argentina, he had discussed things he had heard from Jesuit priests regarding secret chambers beneath the Vatican that house delicate. He claimed that records dating back hundreds of years are where the church hides secrets that must never see the light. She remembered, and Jorge never described how he found particular safe, but Maria Elena thought he might have found it while looking through internal materials following his appointment as Pope, and possibly the most startling aspect was Jorge. Pope Francis' decision to remain silent was not a sign of complicity, but rather felt that whatever faith he had left would be destroyed by another worldwide scandal. Silent reform shift from within, although in his last years, Maria claims, he once told me that she started to regret that decision, whispering, "Perhaps the church needs to be totally destroyed in order to rebuild it honestly. Perhaps I was too frail, perhaps the Pope ought to have put an end to the lies rather than shielding them." Jorge made the heartbreaking admission to Pope Francis in his last days, according to Maria Elena, his sister, but this was only the start of a spooky series of disclosures. She stated that Jorge attempted to make arrangements for his confidential document to be made public upon his death, but something or someone. Maria claimed that the file had vanished from the storage when someone intervened. Location Jorge had previously pointed out, Vatican authorities not only rejected despite the dossier's existence, they would not recognize it, but Maria stayed firm because they fear what's within and they know it's true. The most important question at this point is what could be so dangerous in that file, especially for a pope. Mara claims that Jorge spent years researching what he was afraid to disclose. Incidents of abuse and neglect that are referred to as silent tragedies, occurring in isolated dioceses when silence engulfed screams for assistance. Victims, primarily youngsters from underdeveloped nations, who are not only overlooked by the globe but by the church that was supposed to keep them safe. Maria remembered once claiming that an unrecorded data case warehouse was ordered to be buried by. Priests were discreetly moved, and bishops used hush money to silence witnesses. Instead of being held responsible, Jah attempted to reopen multiple cases, encountered opposition from superiors at all times, and then with his remaining power, Jorge Pope Francis gave Maria a tiny wooden rosary had no tangible worth. It wasn't made of gold, only old, weathered wood, but he informed his sister that it was studded with gems. Belonged to a young man in Argentina who sought assistance from the church and was rejected. He passed just a week later. Jorge had preserved that rosary for decades. Bitter warning that keeping quiet or turning a blind eye can sometimes result in death. Maria claimed that the rosary represented her brother's unspoken grief, which is why she couldn't keep quiet any longer. It wasn't merely a relic. It was his final desire, but she was much more hurt by the Vatican's refusal to accept anything. Silence, no acknowledgement of his deathbed vow, and strange, almost intentional, hush Pope Francis's successor's plot, but what she was going to. Maria claimed that the next revelation was the most horrifying of all the information regarding the successor of Pope Francis and the alleged covert transaction in which a man was involved. Signed when the bells rang around the Vatican long before Jorge had even left, and the globe rejoiced in the start of a new age as white smoke rose to signify it. New Pope, although few were aware that there had already been a succession. Maria Elena claimed that Jorge had previously told her about his deep, not because of differences in theology, but because of worries about the man who would follow him, but because to a tacit agreement he thought had already been made by influential. Jorge said to the Roman Curious forces, "They've already chosen him." One night, when his sister's voice sounded like ash, Maria was astonished and inquired, "Who are they, and why do you have to be mute around them?" Jorge didn't immediately respond, merely sighed before mentioning Cardinal Matteo. Terresco is a man who is widely praised as a refined, magnetic or fresh air for the cathedral, but Hoy claims that underneath that gleam was something more darker. He informed Maria that he had found a note in Cardinal Terresco allegedly promised influential groups in secret within the Vatican that he would refrain from delving into the hidden documents, particularly those pertaining to South American abuse cases, Eastern Europe and Africa from the late 1980s. Pope Francis has been attempting to look at these papers for years, but they were repeatedly prevented by a system is too big, and they're too afraid of the truth. They don't want everyone to Forget that Jorge muttered that they wanted it removed from history. Although Maria didn't want to accept it, she knew her brother in her heart wasn't inclined to worry unnecessarily about the Vatican's stillness, the unexplained loss of files, and the hurried exaltation of the new. Maria chose to speak rather than protest the pontiff because everything was ignoring her church, but to shield the aspect of her brother that he had concealed as well. She would reveal her knowledge of Cardinal Matteo Teresco, the incoming pope, in the upcoming chapter, along with the reasons why she felt Jorge had passed away regretfully, aware that the truth would once more be. Why would anyone desire to be buried beneath the sign chapel's white smoke? Conceal the truth, particularly now that Maria Elena Bigalio has raised that query, not of others, but according to her conscience. Jorge Pope Francis had previously declared, "The Vatican was a deeply divided organization that was never a single entity. Organization divided between those who genuinely desired reform and those who wanted. Must maintain stability for the latter group at all costs, renewing old wounds. Not only endangered their reputations but also their hold on the authority ingrained in the Church." Maria described how the situation grew more concerning as highs. Late 2023 saw a sharp fall in health, with subtle yet concerning changes starting. Nonetheless, Jorge appeared in public less frequently after conversations with. Most significantly, independent journalists ceased to use the phrase accountability. Initially, Maria assumed he was simply worn out, but the reality started to dissect one by one. A number of Jorge's closest advisors, those regarded as supporters of his reform initiatives, were abruptly moved or compelled to down without providing a formal explanation, and many of them were replaced by new faces. He had close relations to Aaron, according to an unnamed Vatican source. There were speculations circulated about Cardinal Matteo Tedesco, the recently appointed pope, that Jorge had planned to publish a startling apostolic letter requesting the opening of historical abuse-related archives, but that letter, which was shelved only weeks before his death, had the potential to alter everything. However, Maria stated that what she alluded to and what she said might never be made public. Few people ventured to openly express that this Jorge might have been outwitted in his last days. Maria claims, not by time but by the very organization he oversaw. The principles of reform that Jorge formerly promoted had been abandoned by the Vatican, and the next pope was picked for his perseverance rather than his religion. Quiet, the exact quiet that H attempted to disrupt, and then Maria disclosed what sent a. She claimed to have received a brief, anonymous letter that sent a shudder down her spine. 3 sentences. Use caution while speaking about your brother's honorable death. Don't give the. Lacks a signature and a return address, but it's weighty enough to silence most. Maria wasn't the most people's disclosure of the truth exposing information, but Maria knew Jorge hadn't simply. He had left behind evidence that was concealed deep within a simple wooden chest. Maria preserved in a modest Buenos Aires home what she considered to be the finest and compilation of records from the Catholic Church's recent history. Handwritten papers from Pope Francis's secret notebooks were found within the chest. They contained unfiltered reflections, coded notes, and cryptic allusions to the last 2 years of his life. Numbers and occurrences that previously revealed what made these journals. Not only was it important who wrote them, but Jorge also knew when they were written. Maria stated that Jorge started the journals after a major, but he didn't have much time left. 2023 health crisis. A hospital stay that almost killed him. In a stuttering phone conversation, Jorge said to his sister, "I'm not sure how. My hands can still write, therefore I'll write whatever I want for as long as they allow me talk freely." One of the first things he wrote was, "My voice is no longer allowed to say. My stillness is no longer a state of peace. Rather, it is dread masquerading as obedience." Pope Francis's blog started to become a sluggish, disintegrating both physically and mentally. Jorge documented meeting senior cardinals who allegedly put pressure on him to keep quiet about examples of historical abuse. These guys advised him to preserve the Church's unity rather than fight for justice. But When the weak were in danger, High was never one to be silent. Maria was particularly troubled by High's writing. To maintain the institution by rejecting, in order to crucify Christ once more, I have examined the victims' eyes. I've heard their tales, but I've been taught to maintain my composure, but I wasn't forced to. Keep secrets safe. I was created as Pope to serve God, and he also left a. Bishops and priests suspected of child abuse are listed in a secure dossier. Documents from dioceses in the US, Australia, and Europe showed that millions of euros were spent by influential cardinals to buy victims' silence and relocation, offending priests to various parishes rather of bringing charges against them. A thorough ledger of the financial documents in the safe was even more unsettling. Detailed monthly payments that were purportedly copied by a Vatican bank employee to public servants in a number of nations in return for tax breaks and authority over church property in one very startling deal entailed a real estate company's unlawful purchase of an old Italian convent. $50 million was transferred to a Luxembourg-based secret account by a company in. Francis also stated in another letter that he had attempted to restructure the Vatican Bank by employing independent auditors and dismissing dishonest directors, yet every change encountered a barrier of opposition and dangers. But Francis's findings didn't end there. Money and misuse, a series of private correspondences between cardinals and, according to diplomats, the Vatican secretly supported political campaigns in a number of nations, including governments that violate human rights to safeguard the Church's interests. These records are carefully kept in a list of extravagant presents and agreements with shell corporations for money laundering were contained in the safe, such as artwork and gold timepieces presented to foreign dignitaries. Francis wrote, he was unable to express the truth in public because he felt imprisoned in a labyrinth of sin, damaging the spiritual mission of the Church. Maria said that her brother never. Jorge meant for his remarks to be buried in one of their last exchanges. Requested that she make some of the material public when the time was appropriate, but now, since H's passing, Maria thinks that time might never arrive, despite her vows to. Received a lot of requests from anonymous people and church representatives, insisting that she turn up the journals, saying that if they were taken out of context, it would be better for the Church that. Ho trusted me with this, and now I'm confused and hurt, Maria added. Realize that the truth will always cause discomfort before it brings about. Maria claims that this was not the only piece of evidence discovered within the. Jorge left a sealed packet with betrayal marks on the same wooden chest. Nobody knows what's inside, not even Maria, who claims she's been told not to. Not open it until she is certain it won't be seized or destroyed. Some people speculate that it might include recordings of confidential testimony or even a list of participants in the power battle Jorge mentioned in his journals and the ascent of Cardinal Matteo Tedesco, whom Jorge had previously feared. Now more than ever, Maria must decide whether to risk everything for. Either talk about what her brother left behind or keep quiet to protect the honor of. Maria is currently struggling with the topic of his memory in death as the tension rises, but the tale doesn't stop there. Maria just disclosed that she has obtained correspondence from the relatives of victims of abuse urging her to publish the journals they think H might have kept that no one else has. The guts to state that they hope those pages include priests' names. Even cardinals and bishops who have avoided justice for themselves are not listed in the journals. There is hope in history. Thus the question at hand is not whether Pope Francis was silenced, but the true question is whether his remarks have greater impact now, compared to the silence he was made to endure, which has produced the tale of a revered pope to an unfortunate turn. Final legacy he left behind that isn't engraved on, either set in marble headstones or preserved in Vatican medals. Instead, it exists in the small, quiet actions, a kind look, a straightforward deed. He left after hearing a gentle message from someone who only wanted to be heard. Behind for all of his family members and Maria Elena, the last living individual who. She put it best when she remarked, I see him in every quiet act of kindness. Love, not the papacy or the gold investments, is what he left me. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who was born on the day Pope Francis died, was called the Church into a revered farewell that was planned for the last time. Through the Sign Chapel dome, with the precise light that is characteristic of the Vatican. Cardinals in solemn formation, dressed in deep red robes, sending Pope Francis's well-crafted condolences are a historic event that was aired worldwide. Was more than just the Church's spokesperson. He was a self-centered individual. In order to preserve that visage, he lived with a sadness that transcended religion and the anguish of a solitary spirit. Mara remembered how H used to use leftover crumbs to feed the sparrows. Called her Nana, which is a Spanish synonym for love. These were recollections that documented in the Church's records, but they served as the basis for a man who bowed before the suffering of the world, who paid attention to the silent things, and what people were moved by her honesty as well as the way she spoke of him. Maria Elena didn't portray him as a saint, saying that his voice wasn't flawless. Although his brother occasionally made grave errors, he always made an effort to act morally. Thing in a society that expects public leaders to be flawless, her admission touched millions of hearts like a tsunami, and she didn't conceal the moments of. She merely highlighted one of the emotional scars, the long silences, and the hesitancy. Francis also left an impression because he consistently chose love even when it harmed him. Via his unwavering dedication to social justice and protecting the underprivileged he was an Argentinian who presented the Vatican with a viewpoint from the global south where his apostolic exhortation highlights the fact that poverty and inequality are daily realities. Evangelium denounced the exclusionary economy and the lethal apparatus of world leaders are being urged by uncontrolled capitalism to give the fragile. He regularly encountered inmates and homeless refugees, doing acts such as cleaning Muslims and Hindus' feet on holy. He was lauded as the Pope of the Poor in Thursday posts on X, with one user saying, "Francis lives compassion, not just preaches it." His legacy has inspired people all around the world. Social movements ranging from neighborhood nonprofits to 2015 also left behind another groundbreaking legacy: environmental stewardship and injustice. The Church's first green text, the encyclical Laudato Si', was published in urgent appeal for action to combat climate change and safeguard our shared. It was a call to mankind rather than simply Catholics. Home. The United Nations referenced Laudato Si' in order to emphasize the connection between environmental and social justice. Sustainability reports, and Francis became as a well-known spokesperson at international Reuters reports on climate summits and environmental campaigners like Greta. Even if they don't share his faith, Thunberg said they appreciate him. Heritage-inspired environmental projects in Catholic parishes around the world, ranging from garbage management to renewable energy schemes. Church reform was an essential, albeit contentious, component of his reduction programs. Later, he took decisive action to purge the Vatican Bank of financial malfeasance. By dismissing officials involved in money laundering and employing impartial auditors, Francis also created to handle sexual abuse, the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. Scandals offered victims public apologies and enforced more stringent initiatives. His legacy of interfaith harmony, and his expansion. Talking with leaders of different religions, including Muslims, Jews, and Buddhists. In 2019, he made history by traveling to the United Arab Emirates, and Francis was also a signatory to the Abu Dhabi Declaration on Human Fraternity. Strong opponent of conflict from the Middle East to Ukraine, calling on world leaders to. According to the BBC, peace comes before politics, and his trips to troubled areas such South Sudan and Iraq demonstrated bravery and a dedication to giving the. Maintaining this heritage strengthened the Vatican's position as a world mediator. The brother of George Mara didn't require sainthood. All he wanted was to be genuinely recalled as someone who consistently opted for kindness, even in the face of. At much expense, Maria Elena never requested fame on his part. She merely hoped that he would be remembered as a brother and a modest man. Not a far-off symbol, but a flawed person with mistakes and moments of elegance. Pope Francis is a shepherd of souls who leads them with compassion, tenderness, and humility. Has died, but his tale is far from over because he is the only one still alive. Maria Elena, her sibling, has spoken up, but what she says isn't very impressive. Vatican splendor or speech, it's the sinister truths the Pope revealed during his. What do you think of this narrative in your lifetime? If you enjoyed it, click the like button. Please share your opinions in the comments section below and help us out by subscribing to the channel. Then enabling alerts to ensure you don't miss the following chapter in this developing mystery.